Good morning, everyone, near and far. Welcome to the SALISES Forum online. I am Roy Mccree, and I will be your chair for this new installment of our SALISES Forum. I have the simple task of counting time and also communicating questions to our panelists. Welcome to each of our panelists. Professor Carl Tierro, Ms. Suniti Maraj, Mr. Amikal Sanatan, our colleague Dr. Priya Mohan, and Dr. Selvan Hazel. Welcome all. I will now hand you over to our acting director, Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, who would bring you further greetings. Dr. St. Bernard.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All protocols observed. It gives me great pleasure to welcome each and every one of you to the inaugural virtual SALISES Forum entitled Budgeting for Development in a Global Pandemic. I first want to recognize the campus principal of the St. Augustine campus, Professor Brian Copeland, the PVC in charge of graduate studies and research, Professor Rosemary Bell-Antwine, and the University Director of SALISES, Professor Aldry Henry Lee. They sent their best wishes, but unfortunately, due to prearranged engagements, they are unable to attend this forum. Prior to August 2017, SALISES forums were a staple on the academic calendar of SALISES. They permitted SALISES to address current issues deemed critical on national, regional, and international landscapes, drawing upon informed positions, sometimes confrontational, but generally to engage debate on such issues and inform the general public. The inaugural virtual SALISES Forum is the first since 2017. The forum has been awakened from its slumber and dressed in new clothes. It is obviously virtual for reasons we can all understand, and it is designed to fulfill the mandate of SALISES as a scholarly cross-campus organ that contributes to discourses and the promotion of active development policy agendas in the Caribbean. To this end, we draw on scholars, researchers, and other allied professionals, whether from SALISES, the wider UWI, or elsewhere, to bring sober reflections and insights to bear upon critical issues of interest to progressive development agendas. My colleagues and I trust that you will enjoy the stimulating presentations and discussions that will begin shortly. As a cross-campus unit with branches on the Mona, Cave Hill, and St. Augustine campuses of the UEs, SALISES has grown in stature to become a regional think tank. We host our annual conferences. We had the last one, the 22nd annual conference of SALISES during the 28th to the 30th of September 2021, and it was a resounding success. We hope and are planning to have the next one during the second quarter of 2022, and that will be organized in Barbados as a blended conference. Of course, the one that I spoke of was organized out of Jamaica, and the following year, it will be Trinidad and Tobago's turn to organize that conference. SALISES also hosts the annual Caribbean Child Research Conference, and we also have several thematic seminars and symposia which we expose and invite members of the public to attend. In SALISES St. Augustine, the upcoming year will be marked by several thematic seminars, symposia, and virtual forums. Subsequent forums will address managing the national educational system, COVID-19 pandemic, lessons learned, and charting progressive agendas. We will also be looking in future forums at human rights, contemporary livelihoods, and migration currents in Trinidad and Tobago. And another topic that will be of interest, among others, of course, will be revisiting the establishment of the National Statistics Institute of Trinidad and Tobago. Many of you have submitted pre-forum questions, which constitute impressive options to guide topics that we may wish to field in future virtual SALISES forums. All in all, we are pleased to have you in this first inaugural virtual SALISES forum, and we thank each and every one of you for your attention and virtual presence, and wish that you would certainly enjoy today's proceedings. I thank you very much, and I turn you over to the chairperson. Thank you very much.
Good morning again, colleagues and listeners near and far. I would like to begin the discussion this morning by inviting Professor Carl Tierro to get the discussions going. Professor Carl Tierro is known for, is Professor Emeritus at the University of the West Indies, and is known for his pioneering work in health economics, in which he has made a substantial contribution to the university and to the region. And I will now invite Professor Carl Tierro to make his presentation. Each presenter would have 10 minutes to make their presentation. I would give you a 2-minute warning to wrap up. Professor Tierro.
Right. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Ryan. First, let me begin by thanking SALISES for the invitation to share in this discussion. I'm not sure what's going on here. My slides are going faster than I want them to. Okay. Yeah, so I want to thank SALISES, and it's good to see people I haven't seen for a good while. Suniti, so it's good to see you, and I haven't seen you for maybe years, I'm sure. And Selvon, very good to see you as well. Priya as well, long time I haven't seen you. Very good to see you. What I want to talk this morning is about, we want to talk about budget, but it's about health. In fact, when I saw the program at first, I was puzzled. Why would they put health first in a budget discussion? But then as I thought about it, I said, no, that's correct, because in fact, the budget itself should have been written like that. Health should have been the first thing that they should have spoken about, because as we know, if it's one thing we learned from COVID, is that health and the economy are closely linked. In fact, I like to make the statement that health cradles the economy. If the health of the population is in trouble, then the economy is going to be in trouble. That is one of the things that COVID has showed us. And what we also know is that there's a literature which links health to the economy, and that literature has been around for a good while. But I don't think the story of that literature has never hit us as clearly as COVID has shown us. COVID has shown us that without a doubt, there's no question that if the health of the population is in trouble, our economies are going to be in trouble. Now, the budget mentioned a number of the decline in income in a number of countries, and of course, to make the point, as ministers of finance like to do, that Trinidad was in a better state than all the rest. In fact, we have some of the numbers there. We see the numbers. Some countries, their GDP fell 17%, 18%, and that kind of thing. Trinidad is measured at 7.4%. Or there are those who believe that is an underestimate, but probably it's not more than about 10%. That's my own view. Okay. What would the budget and what in a situation, in a context, and what should we expect to see in the budget? And I think, well, of course, obviously we would want to, we expect to see the budget showing up measures to arrest the decline that the COVID had, it's not COVID started, COVID had continued really. The decline was started before COVID. And we want to see some measures in the budget pointing in that direction. But in terms of health, we certainly wanted to see resources to cope with the current situation, the COVID situation, and the immediate impacts of it as far as the health system is concerned. We want to see resources put there, and we want to see resources put as far as making the health system stronger, because COVID has come, but COVID might not be the last of its kind. And the health system, we have to think about how we would make the health system more resilient. And again, the budget, we would have expected to see some. And we'd expect to see measures to protect the health of the population, because of course, it is the population's health when it's in trouble that the economy gets in trouble. So we expect the budget to do things to talk about protection of the population. Now the budget, from what I saw, I could point to things that talk about how we're going to arrest and reverse the decline in the economy. There are some things, the resources mentioned about coping with the current health problems, and some things about the investment, the reference to the new hospitals and so on that were built is pointing to the investment in the resilience of the health system. But what I certainly didn't see in the budget was anything about protecting the health of the population, reducing vulnerability. And given that we are in a situation where we are virtually on the cusp of another epidemic, an epidemic of non-communicable diseases, I think it's probably, from where I sit, it's important that I think that the budget should start telling us about things like this. Now, the budget does say, it begins by it early went in the health section, tells us that COVID has exposed cracks in the health system. It does say that quite rightly, and it recognizes that that the efficiency in the health system is important for the economy. Now, we have evidence. There's some studies that were done on Trinidad in 2017, and the evidence showed that for a subset of the non-communicable diseases, I think the ones they chose was diabetes and hypertension. For that subset of non-communicable diseases, the loss in the GDP because of these is about 4.7%, almost 5% of the GDP, which is about 7 to 8 billion. Now, that is something we have to keep in mind. Here we're running a country, but we have things in the country that are pulling the GDP down, and that is something we have to pay some attention to. Now, it's no secret that the minister spoke about the cracks in the health system. Well, of course, one of the biggest cracks, one of the biggest cracks is the weakness of the health financing system. Now, this is a system in Trinidad where we spend about $10 billion in health. But we spend that money, but we know there is the degree of efficiency is not what it really should be. The public system alone spends about 6 billion, and what we know is that there are reviews that have been done which point out to the weaknesses, and there's a high degree of dissatisfaction. And you know, in as far as our emergency centers are concerned, people waiting long for surgery, waiting long to get their tests in different. I mean that has been going on, and it's not a question of the resources not being there, and that is one of the issues that we have to face. Now, I'm trying to get this. What is the missing link? The missing link is a link that we have been pointing to for a while in the center, the Center for Health Economy. The missing link really, if you think about it, because we're talking about getting the health system to work more efficiently, recognizing, as COVID has shown us, that the efficiency of the health system and its contribution to the health of the population will impact on what is happening to the economy. So getting the health system to work efficiently is key. And the missing link, we have argued, is the social insurance system. We got a social health insurance system. Now, it's interesting because in the early part of his budget, the minister indicated that this budget was influenced by one of the things the budget was influenced by was the manifestos of the party that is in power. But in terms of in the 2015 manifesto, there was a direct promise to bring the social health insurance system. Now, World Health Organization in 2005 put, as many of you all might remember, they put the notion of universal health coverage on the table for everybody. All countries also were supposed to aim to get healthcare for every single person in the country in a way that is at a good level, and ensuring that people don't have financial distress because of health. That is what the World Health Organization put on the table. But they also put on the table at the same time.
Excuse me, Professor Tierro, 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. That is not going to happen if you don't get something like a social health insurance going. Because what is the social health? It is really a pool. It is a pool of funds. It's a national pool. Working people put in the pool, business community put in the pool, and the government put in it. And this pool is not going to cover everybody in a way that is interesting. Now, when the social health insurance is coming, in fact, we also bring it with a health information system, which helps to get the efficiency side of this system going. And you know, the main thing about the social health, the PS, the resistance, as I call it, of the social health insurance system, you know, is that it is a package of care we say everybody must enjoy. When we cost that package, the evidence we have, and this is the evidence, is that the ones we check for the region here and for countries out of the region, it is always shown that the cost of such a package is less than what the country is currently spending on health. When you add up the public spending and the private spending, the package we're talking about is going to cost less. So what we are doing is inviting the government to see the social health insurance as something that is good, not just for the health system, but for the economy of the country, because it is the thing that will help to get the morbidity levels of the country lower than it is. And morbidity is an enemy of the GDP. People, you cannot have a population of people are either very sick or on things like that. The GDP is not going to grow as it should. And therefore, in order to get the GDP working better, we are saying, give everybody access to the healthcare, give everybody access. Is a system where people will have access to public and private care, public facilities and private facilities, and we set it up in a way where it is managed in a way that it is sustainable, and it ensures that everybody has the access to care when the access is. So we are inviting the government to see the social insurance as a link to the to the economy. Now, the minister himself in the budget has the statement that it makes sense to invest in better health outcomes as a key for building health resilience, and to make the health system work in a more efficient level. And we are saying that the social health insurance is exactly what is needed at this time. And it would have been great if we saw it in the budget, but we hope that there's a midterm review coming up, and I hope he's going to give some thought to put the social health insurance in the midterm review. I want to end there.
Thank you, Professor Tierro, for setting the stage for the discussions. I want now to introduce Dr. Tayemba Salandi to make his presentation. Dr. Salandi is a young emerging sociologist at the University of the West Indies, whose specialty areas include sustainable development, education, globalization, and social inequalities. He's also director at the Institute of Indigenous Knowledge, Empowerment, and Research, which has an ongoing project towards encouraging ecological livelihoods, dialogue, and social justice. I now invite Dr. Salandi to make his presentation. 10 minutes.
Thank you, Roy, and good morning to the audience and to the esteemed panel. I am here this morning to share some thoughts on the budget. And we have this budget being presented under the theme of resilience in the face of a global pandemic. I am not only interested in the specifics of the budget, but I'm interested in how it fits into a wider system of leadership, governance, and what development ideas underlie, the spending as outlined in the budget. So we have 6.9% of the budget, or $6.9 billion allocated within this 2022 budget for education. And this morning, I will focus specifically on the education sector to examine some of the main trends and realities as experienced within this sector. So we have $6.9 billion allocated. However, beyond that allocation, I'm interested in the ideas, philosophies, frameworks that underlie this allocation. And two of the guiding principles or frameworks underlying the education system would be the country's adherence to the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically point 4 on education. And I think that the Sustainable Development Goals are problematic in of themselves, but sometimes we don't have enough critique and dialogue around these global or international frameworks that we simply import without any real deep understanding of how our individual and social historical context really aligns, and may have aspects that there may be things that we may need and may need to focus on that really aren't contained in some of these global programs. The second policy framework that is important is the Ministry of Education's Education Development Plan 2017 to 2022. And all of these documents have certain ideas about the education system that is important for us to gauge as we understand how this money is being allocated. Now, the education system is extremely important because as far as I'm concerned, children are born geniuses in this world. And often we have the education system and other adults in the environment contributing towards the underdevelopment of children. So how do we form and create an education system that isn't simply about creating a mass of people to pass through university or get degrees, but how do we actually equip our children to be connected to their communities, to have a concern with addressing some of the central concerns and problems that face our society. So the issue really isn't just certification, as often is the focus, or simply passing exams, but rather to equip children with the tools and skills and knowledge to really face and navigate a very hostile and challenging global world system. Now, no amount of money, no amount of fancy plans, no amount of fancy papers or policies could ever compensate or address if a basic understanding of the education system is missing. And when I have reviewed past budgets, when I have reviewed this Ministry of Education's Development Plan 2017 to 2022, there is an absence of understanding of key elements of the education system. So for example, we have this, what is called the white paper on education, talking about and acknowledging the inequalities that exist in the education system. Yet it doesn't really give a lot of details as to the dimensions of education or educational inequality that are present. So it's acknowledging it on one hand, yet the details of it is murky, so that if the details are not there, there cannot really be the strategies and plans and policies to really confront the inequalities of the education system. Education would have evolved not to support and brand, but rather to uphold the status quo, which would have been firstly to have citizens who were very obedient to colonial hierarchies and policies. And so one of the main concerns and issues with any education system actually is the deep inequality that pervades the education system. So that when we talk about resilience in the face of a global pandemic, the issue is not the pandemic, but the issues of inequality that has been observed in the education system has predated the pandemic. So we are dealing with historical issues. And one of the books that I like to recommend for understanding of this is actually a book by Selwyn Ryan, or rather Ramesh Diosharan rather, that is titled Inequality, Crime and Education in Trinidad and Tobago. And Professor Diosharan does a decent job of giving an overview of some of the main trends within the education system. And he concludes that the deep levels of inequality contributes to a lot of social ills. Yet, if the budgetary allocations and the development of various papers and policies on the education system does not really connect to some of these historical realities, then I think that we would have missed the mark. Now, some of the other points relate to a current piece of research I'm doing on the education system, where I'm looking at the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the educational experiences of secondary school students. And recently I was talking to a secondary school student, and he just sat exams. And he explained to me that he had to do his work on his parents' cell phone. So we have many children, because of class issues and a lack of resources, they simply do not have access to technological devices or Wi-Fi to participate properly in this virtual environment. And we have not only this digital divide, but as outlined in Diosharan's book and other pieces of research, we have other issues of class biases inherent in the education system. So if you come from a middle or upper class family, you are more likely to succeed in the mainstream education system. And this is, of course, outlined in pieces of research such as the one done by Ishmael Bash. If you are a child in a school and you have some developmental issue, it is quite easy for you to be labeled as dunce, labeled as not so intelligent, and the parents and the schools may not be able to offer the sort of interventions to deal with these developmental challenges, as compared to if someone comes from a more economically wealthy family, then there is the ability to pay for interventions and pay for the expertise for the child to overcome these developmental challenges. So I fear that there is a deep degree of inequality within the education system that is not being addressed. And it not only affects children from less fortunate households, but it affects everybody, because going along with the inequality is what I would call the cancer of the prestige school complex, where we have a deeply stratified secondary school system that is based upon the idea that at age 11, you can tell where a student is destined for and be able to place them accordingly. And this is a deeply flawed policy that actually came from a 20th century British psychologist called Sir Cyril Burke, who actually was a white supremacist. He believed that intelligence was inherited, and he believed that at age 11, you could do a test to determine where a child is destined for. And we in the Caribbean have simply reproduced some of these very flawed ways of doing education, instead of having that energy, that drive to look globally and see what are some of the ongoing and successful experiments in education. And you have some very interesting things going on in Norway and Sweden that we could draw from, not to totally implement, but to see how it could fit in our educational context.
Excuse me, Tayemba, 2 more minutes.
Right. So we also have the fact that our dominant education system doesn't only affect children who may be having educational challenges, but it also affects some ordinary, extremely gifted students who would be passing through the mainstream education system and be bored. And they would be bored because there would be little within the education system that could really spark and deal with the fact that they may be ahead of where they may be placed in their class. So in wrapping up, I want to assert the idea that the issues within our education system would have predated the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm yet to see the types of philosophies, the types of eagerness, the drive to transform the education system to make it more relevant to ordinary people, make it more relevant to addressing some of our societal needs and issues, and to really be able to transform the education system into something that is actually able to bring out the potential of our young people. And so I fear that our young people will continue to have very harsh experiences at the hands of an education system that was never created nor evolved in their interests. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tayemba, for your presentation. And staying within the time limit, I would now like to invite Dr. Priya Mohan to make a presentation. Priya is a fellow and economist at SALISES, who has done work in several important areas relating to Caribbean growth, sustainable development, including natural disasters, climate change, diversification, innovation, knowledge economies, debt, and public finance, as well as entrepreneurship. So I now would like to invite Priya to make a presentation, and she has 10 minutes within which to do so. Priya?
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to thank the SALISES and of course the Director, Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, for the opportunity to present on this esteemed panel. My presentation would look at labor market dynamics, economic diversification, and innovation with regards to the 2021-2022 budget. Now, preparing this budget is no easy task. The pre-COVID-19 economic outlook was already poor, and our post-lockdown economic outlook does not seem to be improving. We had a decline in oil and gas prices, and that is changing a little bit now, I think, and the government is hedging a lot of confidence in that. We've also had massive fiscal shocks coming out of the pandemic, decline in revenue, increase in expenditure, and higher debt. We've also had high social impacts from poverty to unemployment. We had issues of health and education, as my two previous speakers spoke about. We had the closure of many businesses. We also have the issue of Venezuelan migration in this country. And of course, we can't ignore the real psychological impact of living in this period that we are living in, which comes with depression, alcoholism, domestic violence, etc. Now we are at the phase in Trinidad and Tobago where we do have the community spread of the Delta variant. Our vaccination program will continue into 2022. We just have about 38% of the population being fully vaccinated. We do still have a 7-day average of about 200 cases, and we still have a 7-day average of about 7 deaths. So we still have a long way to go. And these are just the numbers to show that the projected expenditure is 52.4 billion, which is higher than last year, which would have been 45 billion. Our projected revenue, 43.3 billion. We expect a fiscal deficit of about 9 billion or 5.8% of GDP. And our estimated oil price is now $65 per barrel versus a price of $45 per barrel last year. The natural gas price is more or less the same. And we see here the sectors that would have been given the allocations, education and health, of course, topping that list. So the reaction from the public, well, some people felt it was a give and take, some goodies, some new taxes. We see that things may be looking up in that, again, we do have these rising energy prices and we are pegging a lot of confidence on that. We do see Tobago getting more money. We do see the opposition saying it's a war on the people. But coming from the business chamber perspective, we have seen a lot of the business community being quite pleased by the measures. The TTMA saying that they are pleased by the measures towards the SME sector. The energy chamber calling for speedy tax reform of energy to increase exploration and production, of course. We see ANCHAM stating that the budget does attempt to re-inject confidence into the economy, but they do express that there is a lack of detail. And we do see Diane Haddad from the Tobago Chamber expressing some concern and confusion as to some of the measures, stating that these measures for Tobago would have been on the books previously. Now, we do have from the Business Guardian saying that there is no economic strategy in the budget. And this is where the rest of my presentation is going to focus on how do we create an economic strategy for going forward post-COVID-19. And in order to create that kind of strategy, we need to look at the past and we need to look at where we're going. And clearly COVID-19, as was said by Professor Tierro, did not cause our problems. We've been having low or negative growth since 2018. We have some prediction of an improvement in growth in 2022, but then we have an IMF prediction more recently of a 1% contraction. And we also see since 2018, we've been having budget deficits with our revenue being much lower than our expenditure. If we look at all the other data, they point in the wrong direction. We see unemployment increasing, net official reserves decreasing, consumer spending decreasing. We see our quarterly economic activity for both the energy and non-energy sector decreasing. We see our business and consumer loans decreasing. Now, in terms of the natural gas and oil prices, we've had low prices since 2018, but now we are seeing an uptick as we kind of come out of the pandemic, given the vaccination drive that has been taking place. Looking at our ease of doing business index, we are still ranked relatively low, and businesses do face a lot of hurdles still in terms of starting a business, dealing with construction permits, getting electricity, getting access to credit, resolving insolvency and enforcing contracts, etc. We do see our business community still facing a lot of these problems. Now, in the budget statement, the minister did say that the budget is linked to the roadmap to recovery, and that is the development plan. And there would have been a list of sectors around this plan, and I have them listed here: digital transformation, construction, agriculture, housing, sport and youth, etc. And what I'm going to do now is really take us through what this post-COVID-19 recovery strategy could or should look like. And I do borrow from the literature in applying these strategies to Trinidad and Tobago, and of course, realigning it to the budget measures to see where we're going. And I'm going to speak about green growth, blue economy, agri-tech, digital transformation, SMEs and entrepreneurship, and I'm going to end speaking about goal setting and development planning. Now, looking at green growth, why is a green growth strategy important for us? Well, as a small island developing state, we are on the front lines of climate change. A green growth strategy is going to help us fight climate change impacts, better manage our natural capital, and protect our environment, help us diversify and create green jobs, attract private sector investment, and international climate finance. But how do we do this? How do we go about this green growth strategy? And this really encompasses a whole revamp of our ecosystem, where we're looking at our inputs, labor and capital. But we do also emphasize our natural resource inputs, looking at energy, raw materials, water, biomass, etc. And we do want to take our production to more recycling and reuse. And when we produce our outputs, we do want to provide more sustainable consumption and production. And in order to do this, we need to create the right incentives through taxes and subsidies. We need to have the right regulation. We need to invest in education and training for this to happen. Looking at some of the measures in the budget around green growth, we see that customs duty and VAT would have been removed on the importation of batteries for electric cars with a 2-year age limit. We see a 30% tax credit for companies in carbon capture and enhanced oil recovery. So that obviously does not speak to all of the issues that a comprehensive green growth strategy requires. Continue with green growth. There's a lot of talk of greening tourism as we try to boost tourism post-COVID-19. The tourism sector is a major consumer of energy and water. This sector is also dependent on natural resources, and development of this sector can, of course, destroy these same natural resources. Why is tourism so important for us? Well, it's a major contributor to employment and economic growth in Tobago. And Dr. Selvon will speak to this later on. Now, how do we go about greening our tourism? Well, it requires a shift across the entire industry. We need to implement policies, practices, and programs that embrace sustainability, conservation of natural resources, renewable sources of energy, reduction of water consumption, and of course, we need to involve our local community. In terms of the budget, we had initiatives targeted at building new hotels and upgrading of hotels. We have the Marriott branded 500 million luxury hotel to be constructed in Tobago, and this is where we needed details, because we don't have information as to whether these new buildings or these upgrades, if it's going to take into account an ecotourism type model. And this is important as we go forward.
Sorry, Priya, 2 more minutes.
Sure, thank you. Now, talking about our strategy around the blue economy, we do have the issue of the development of ports in the budget. If we are to really create a blue economy, we, however, require 6 main pillars, which would be conserving and restoring the ocean, sustainable and traceable seafood, sustainable tourism, curbing ocean pollution, greening of our ports, and harnessing renewable ocean energy. Again, the budget only speaks to the development of our ports. Now, food security and agri-tech became a big issue coming out of the pandemic, because the pandemic would have threatened food security in small island states. And we now have the drive of agri-tech, where we use digital platforms to increase our capabilities through digitization of value chains, e-payments, using of big data analytics to strengthen food security. And this again involves the use of digital technology from production to supply to marketing and demand. Now, speaking about innovation and digital transformation, this is where the budget had a whole host of goodies, and these speak to removing duties on hardware, developing a national ID, the access of free broadband. But again, a comprehensive digital strategy is missing, where we need to integrate e-networks, e-commerce, and then move to digital entrepreneurship. Continuing with the SMEs and entrepreneurship, We do see that SMEs have been flexible coming out of the pandemic, and they are a way to take us forward. But in order to do this, these SMEs do require support. And again, the budget does speak to a whole host of incentives around SMEs. These incentives, however, focus mainly on access to credit and providing access to finance. But if we want to support these SMEs, we need to provide them with technology, networks, R&D, organization and processes, marketing and data. And again, these are elements that were missing in some of the measures implemented in the budget. So I'm just wrapping up now, Chair. Please permit me. In order to create this development plan going forward, it's important that we speak to goal setting and development planning. And this includes several components. We need political commitment. We need to build strong political commitment. We need a long-term vision. So we need to define, implement, and communicate that strategic long-term vision. We need to policy integration. We need to improve our policy integration. We need policy coordination where we ensure a whole of government approach. We need local involvement. We need to engage stakeholders. We need to analyze and assess policy impacts, and we need to strengthen our monitoring and reporting. And we do not need to build from scratch. These development frameworks, we do have the SDGs, which is our international development framework, which we are a part of, and we should leverage the SDGs as we create our post-COVID-19 strategy. And a lot of other small island development states are already doing that. So this is my final slide where I would end, just showing our SDG dashboard and trends. And we see that we've made good progress in no poverty, reducing poverty. But we see that challenges remain in quality education and affordable and clean energy. We do see that we have significant challenges in zero hunger, good health and well-being, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, decent work and economic growth, industrial innovation and infrastructure, and sustainable cities and communities, and also partnerships for future goals. Now, our major challenges still lie in responsible consumption and production, climate change action, life below water, life on land, and peace, justice, and strong institutions. And I end there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Priya, for your presentation. I now want to invite Dr. Hazel to make his presentation. Dr. Hazel works as the Chief Economist in the Economic Management Research Unit of the Tobago House of Assembly. He has a range of research interests in the field of economics that include international trade, international macroeconomics, labor economics, public sector economics, and development economics. I will now invite Dr. Hazel to make his presentation, for which he has 10 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mccree, and so on. And I'd like to start by thanking SALISES for the opportunity to present at this forum and to be a part of this distinguished panel on a topic, the implications of the national budget on Tobago. And to address the topic effectively, we must do so against the context of Tobago's current socio-economic background. So the presentation is separated into two parts. The first part, I would look at Tobago's current socio-economic context, and then I would move on to look at the budget and some of the implications to the budget and so on. So in terms of Tobago's current socio-economic context, in 2019, we had, a growth rate of GDP of around 1.4%, and we were projecting growth again in 2020. Then came COVID, and we saw a significant contraction in the Tobago economy. Tobago, like most other tourism-dependent economies in the Caribbean, suffered a significant decline in its GDP. We estimated the decline in GDP in Tobago for 2020 to be in the order of 14%. And some of the key sectors contributing to the decline were tourism, 57%, construction and quarrying, 33%, and manufacturing, 25%. The only sectors experiencing growth were the state sector that grew by 1% on account of a lot of the COVID spending and so on, as well as the agricultural sector that grew by 2%. All right. So one of the things that when we look at the sectoral contribution to GDP in Tobago arising out of COVID, one of the things that we notice is that increased economic concentration. The level of concentration in the GDP was quite very concentrated prior to COVID, and it was made worse in 2020 arising out of the COVID. So for example, the state sector, which contributed somewhere around 46% of GDP in 2019, by 2020, when we look at the data, the contribution went to 56%. Similarly, tourism. The share of the tourism sector in Tobago's GDP fell from 12% in 2019 to 6% in 2020. So it had increased concentration of output. In terms of prices and inflation, when we look at the official data on inflation coming out of the central bank, we saw inflation being very subdued. The latest inflation figures we have for Tobago is July of this year, and it's indicating that we had headline inflation of 1.6% and food price inflation of 1.5%. But one of the things, we did an exercise where we looked at the movement in prices of over 90 grocery items over the period October last year to April this year. And we found that contrary to what some of the official data is saying, there was significant increases in prices and so on and things. So the data that we pick up from our research is suggesting that there has been some sort of increases in prices and so on. And that is not surprising given what is happening to prices coming out of the COVID experience. In terms of labor market, the latest labor market information we have from the CSO is for the second quarter of 2019. And that data is suggesting that the rate of unemployment in Tobago was very low, 3%. We expect things to be very different now, and so on, as on account of the COVID experience and so on. And the share of the labor force employed in the state sector was somewhere in the order of 70%, with the private sector accounting for the next 40%. All right, so shifting on to the next component of the presentation, in terms of the budget and the budgetary allocation. For fiscal 2022, Tobago received an allocation of $2.4 billion, an increase of 10.5% over the allocation for 2021, and so on. And the allocation to Tobago represented 4.5% of the national budget, and has been consistent, and is consistent with the recommendation of the Dispute Resolution Commission that says that the Tobago House of Assembly should be allocated between 4.03% and 6.9% of the national budget for purposes of recurrent and development expenditure on the island. In terms of the mix between recurrent and development expenditure, we find that the allocation was very skewed, very much skewed towards recurrent expenditure, with the recurrent expenditure accounting for 89% of the overall allocation, with the development program expenditure accounting for only 11%, and so on. Overall, in terms of the budgetary allocation to Tobago, the budgetary allocation to Tobago was only roughly 50% of what was requested by the THA. And so there was a shortfall in terms of what was requested. All right. But beyond the direct allocation to the Tobago House of Assembly, there is another $788 million to be spent in Tobago by government ministries in keeping with the statutory obligation under the 6th schedule of the THA Act and so on. So that would deal, that expenditure would cover things like the new airport terminal, the upgrades to the Dwight York Stadium, and other expenditure to improve safety and security on the island. So in an overall sense, when you look at the allocation to Tobago, the amount of money allocated to Tobago is like 3.2%, $3.2 billion, or 6% of the national budget and so on. Moving on to recurrent, to look at recurrent expenditure. So when we look at the recurrent allocation, the recurrent allocation for fiscal 2022 was 2.1 billion, an increase of 8.3% over the allocation for the previous fiscal year. And in terms of the shortfall on the recurrent budget was somewhere in the order of 33%. But when we drill down into the recurrent allocation, we found something very interesting. About 33% of the allocation for recurrent goes towards personal expenditure, that's wages and salaries, as well as pensions, etc. And when we consider other non-discretionary elements of expenditure in terms of rental of office space and contract employment, because you have a sizable contract staff in the Tobago House of Assembly, and utility bills, etc., the recurrent component comprise 66% of the total non-discretionary component account for 66% of the total allocation, meaning that there are only 34% left for discretionary element. So that means that there's very limited fiscal space in terms of undertaking new initiatives, etc. In terms of the development spending, we notice a significant shortfall in development expenditure. And so the shortfall is in the tune of 83%. And to supplement development expenditure, what that requires is that the THA should reprioritize its development projects, as well as suppress recurrent spending and transfer any excess monies onto supplement the development budget, as well as utilizing off-budget or alternative financing mechanisms to finance the development, in terms of bond financing, loans, etc. Okay. So in terms of the focal or priority areas of the budget, the budget focus, as Priya mentioned, on stimulating the tourism sector, stimulating the agriculture sector, stimulating the SME sectors, and so on, as well as stimulating the digital economy. So all those areas were well covered in terms of the allocation. All right, in terms of the macroeconomic effects of the budget and so on, well, given the allocation and the spending pattern and so on, over the short term, we don't anticipate any significant growth in GDP for 2020, given the current levels of vaccination in Tobago, as well as the fact that there has been partial reopening of the economy. Earlier, we projected a growth rate of 3%, but given where we are now, it's very unlikely that that is going to materialize. So, in terms of the price effects, we expect the removal of VAT on some of the food items to have a dampening effect on food price inflation and so on. But that's in theory. But in practice, prices tend to be sticky downwards. So, I mean, whether or not the reduction in prices materialize would be a sort of empirical issue. And that is the subject of our research project that we undertaking to see, what was the situation prior to November 1 and what's the situation with prices after November 1 and so on, I think. Labor market effects, finally, in terms of the labor market effects, We expect, because of the increase in the recurrent spending, the recurrent allocation to Tobago, and what is happening in terms of the unemployment, the rising unemployment in the private sector, we expect the share of the labor force employed in the state sector to increase beyond its current level of 60% of the labor force. So we expect to see some movement in that indicator. So that's all I wish to say at this time. So thank you.
Thank you again, Dr. Hazel, for your presentation, focusing particularly on the challenges, budgetary challenges faced by Tobago. I would now like to invite Mr. Amical. I see two names for you here, Peter, as well as, I saw two names, but I want to invite Mr. Amical, who is a doctoral candidate in cultural studies, Mr. Amical Sanatan. And his research interests include men and masculinities in the Caribbean and Latin America, youth and student development, urban planning, and cultural geography. Sanatan serves as the Trinidad and Tobago representative for the Commonwealth Students Association, and he's also a steering committee member of the Global Student Forum. He also leads the portfolios for COVID-19, racial justice, and the Caribbean and Americas student constituency. I now invite Mr. Sanatan to make his presentation. You have 10 minutes with him wish to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mccree. And Chair, if you would allow me, I think I only have the capacity to present for 7 minutes, and hopefully the question and answer segment will invite more feedback.
Okay, no problem.
In countries around the world, the reading of the budget in Parliament is a routine exercise that outlines the development focus and corresponding public investment. In Trinidad and Tobago, this routine is also related to our optimism and grimace regarding oil and gas prices. Economic doctrines have little variation in our political system. Fiscal strategies, however, may diverge, but all are consumed and involved in the faith-based petrostate. Dollar on the barrel and debt. These are our options. The 2021 national budget was read 1 year after the 2020 general election, and we can have more sober assessments of governance and economic performance. But alas, the public voices in 2020 that forced us to have consensus and get behind the government, they kind of come into terms with the reality of our time. And so there's room for critical conversation and dialogue. And part of that critical dialogue will be the budget speeches and the accounting, and this idea of it being more gender sensitive, taking into account the differential impacts of social and economic development on women and men. National statistics already embrace some sex disaggregated data, as we see in labor market data. But the question is, are public decisions made take into account this information? What is the gender responsiveness of this budget? And how can gender analyses transform the work of the proposed National Statistical Institute? In my discussion, I will focus on two thematic areas: youth development and gender and development. And truthfully, all issues are youth and gender issues. And perhaps the exclusion from political power might be special to them, but all issues are related to youth and they are gendered. And I ground my presentation in the philosophy of the Tobagonian philosopher, Shadow, who says, if a man is born in luxury, the history always proves to me he is somebody. But if a man is born in poverty, starvation, and misery, he is nobody. Everybody is somebody. Nobody is nobody. The poor or the wealthy, everybody is somebody. So the Minister of Finance specifically addressed youth in the areas of sports and youth development. Increasingly, national development has embraced the sports for development approach conceptually, but the allocation of funds has sometimes narrowed the possibilities of it in implementation. Again, the government has committed to the construction of youth and sporting facilities and to upgrade the existing ones. However, caretaking and the maintenance of these facilities prove that these efforts fall short after a few years, sometimes as little as 2. Notably, there are state policies for management and maintenance, but this is handed off for regional authorities, and then it becomes locked in a complex network of bureaucracy. The grass grows higher, facilities deteriorate, or they are vandalized, and then opportunities for youth to participate in quality investments become limited. It is a welcome addition to see education receive the largest allocation of $6.886 billion. But to paint the picture clearly, this matter has been a sour point for us in the student movement. Both political parties campaigned on the furtherance of GATE funding. In 2020, postgraduate tuition was slashed, building on the means test at the undergraduate level in 2016. Certainly, GATE is a helping hand, but the program and its original intention are no more. It is without doubt that the shocks to the education sector put a close to the number of post-secondary institutions, but it has also created an interesting opportunity for further attention to the national and regional institutions as the primary beneficiaries of the public funding. At no time I'm trying to take up an elitist position or one where I'm singing for my supper because I am a student and I work at the University of the West Indies. But I think it was high time for us to think about the education sector and what people might refer to as the higher education market and what should state resources be investing in. But the work behind this thematic area will be primarily concerned, according to the budget, with ensuring children and adolescents are not left behind in primary and secondary schools. The uneven vaccination uptake and the challenge with national consensus among education planners in the state and teachers would not bring us closer to UNESCO's call for a safe return to schools. The Ministry of Education, in partnership with other stakeholders, have sought to expand internet connectivity to students in communities from all backgrounds. But there must be a wider movement around open data, and I'm speaking to you and I here. Non-proprietary software, coding literacy, which we have seen has already been kickstarted by the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, but also the right to information. These are some of the possibilities Trinidad and Tobago must grab in order to make educational and economic leaps. Interestingly, the minister affirmed information and communication technology is a public good, and many have long argued for this. People like you and I must articulate and politically create how that public good will be produced, consumed, and distributed. Last, I want to specifically look at the state's 2020 commitment to urban renewal development in East Port of Spain. This focus imagined the physical and social transformation of the area. But the building goes up, but it happens without caretakers. How have the recommendations of the Community Recovery Committee turned to action? As physical projects continue in this area, is literacy outreach for all, and children in particular, part of the agenda? We have male contractors, male urban planners, and men involved with construction and our work. And they are the ones stimulated, but oftentimes at the expense of engaging women workers and creating an enabling environment for women's innovation in these areas. This means our eyes should be on both construction work and food catering services that are often led by women who have taken on some of the biggest blows with the closure of schools and limiting of the national school feeding program. We are leading development with work for men and welfare for women and children. I'm happy to discuss these thematic areas and other related issues to youth and gender development in the question and answer. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sanatan, and thank you for not just sharing your views, but sharing your views from the standpoint of a student and whose views sometimes are not heard or not heard enough. I would now like to invite to make her presentation Ms. Suniti Maraj. I don't know if it's a case, Ms. Maraj, of saving the best for last, but we welcome you to the SALISES Forum Online. For those who don't know her, Ms. Maraj is a well-established journalist in Trinidad and Tobago who runs the Caribbean Newsroom, a multimedia production and communications company. She's also a director of the Lloyd Best Institute of the Caribbean. I now invite Ms. Suniti Maraj to make a presentation.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to take great liberties with the topic and deal with not the 2022 budget, but budgeting. And I will be so flexible with the concept of social protection that it will be defined as society and well-being. And I think that the first point to be made is the pandemic provided a once-in-a-century opportunity. It was a bonus, and I do not mean to be insensitive to the people who have been infected and who have died, but for planners, it was that rare moment when you could get off the treadmill. The business about government and the business about governance generally is that you rarely get that opportunity to get off the treadmill because it is a going concern. You have to do this every day and so on. But the opportunity to reflect and review and to capture information about what are we seeing, that was the opportunity. And one of the consequences of that we are seeing globally is a number of people who are saying, I am not going back to my job in the way I was. I was on a treadmill and I do not wish to be there. I've discovered another way of being and of living. That is creating a lot of problems for people because it was the opportunity to really reflect. What did we see? The pandemic showed people, it is commonly said that the pandemic has shown up all the weaknesses in the society. It's also shown up the strengths. And I will very quickly touch on some of these things. Just to, most important of all, for the purpose of budgeting, was the discovery that we simply have no reliable data. And that is, of course, the failure to bring into being the National Institute of Statistics, which when it does come into being, we'll have to be careful that it actually understands its definitions about the economy, about life, about all the elements, what is education and so on, that the very foundation of it actually reflects the existence of information. What it showed us, okay, so that's the first thing, that we were in this pandemic without a compass. I see the point was made by the professor about, our economic performance in the pandemic period, which compares very favorably. But we have to acknowledge that the thing that distinguishes us from the islands that we are comparing ourselves to is that we are an oil and gas economy, that economy continued without any input from us. It goes on, they come, the oil majors are here. We are an offshore economy that is not dependent, say, on an activity inshore, which is what like a tourism economy is. So imagine the next pandemic when fossil fuels are no longer the basis of global economic activity to the extent that it is now. And the other economies that we think perform so badly have geared up for it, and we are now trying to find out what else is there here that we can make a living from and survive. So we have to look at those figures and understand what it tells us that we need to understand to prepare for the future. The other things that we saw, the pandemic threw up a lot of things. The inequality in the education system became absolutely glaring. The whole point about the school is that you leave it to a significant degree, not far from completely, your differences and your inequalities at the door, and everybody puts on the same uniform, they sit in the same classroom, they read the same textbooks, they have the same teacher. And you could make as if there is some kind of common platform here. When you go home and you're being taught from home, the number of children, if they could get connected, I know children who are standing outside a neighbor's gate to pick up on somebody's cell phone, the wireless from somebody else. And that's what they did their class. I know children who was the grandmother and the mother, and they had 4 children, and one was in the bedroom and one was in the kitchen, and so on and so forth. And what you saw was inside of people's lives, the state of their home, and the inequality was just hit you really hard. And a lot of children squirmed and did not want to be seen. So it's not only that children did not have devices, they also felt embarrassed. Their families felt embarrassed. Children, I know, professionals who stayed home so their children could use their cell phone and then went to work with it because they had to go to the office late because they needed that for their work. So these inequalities became very glaring. It will be interesting, and again, this issue of data, because I don't think the data is necessarily reliable, to find out how many children are going to go back to school ultimately. Is it only the vaccination? If you do not feel you've kept up, and if while waiting to keep up, you have started to do something else, especially teenagers, whether you are doing a mechanic, you're hanging out by the mechanic, or you're writing music, are you going to be inclined to go back into a school system, understanding that you might not be able to keep up, and then what would you do after that? So you might be inclined to just stay where you are. And so we need to keep a close eye on what's going on with young people out there, university students as well, and see what happens to them. And again, that is the whole business of data gathering. Well, we've seen the non-communicable diseases, the death rate, I cannot remember, I think it might have been in April, was the last time we may have recorded no deaths on a day. The number of deaths in Trinidad and Tobago is shocking compared to the other Caribbean islands. If you look apart, probably only Jamaica, the Bahamas, but if you look at Barbados, if you look at St. Vincent, if you are going and you work out the figures, you have to ask yourself, why are so many people dying in Trinidad? Is it because, as they say, of comorbidities, the NCDs? Is it the particular treatment plan? What is it? We need to interrogate these things and not just accept that it's comorbidities. But if you have, I think the professor talked about, this is the next pandemic, comorbidity, the NCDs, which we went into the pandemic knowing that we are number 1 in the hemisphere, I think on diabetes, number 2 on cardiac conditions. And so we're paying the price for that. We've seen domestic violence. What happened when people were locked home with each other and there was not the bar outlet, there was not the going to work to escape the pressure, there was not the pressure cooker conditions of the home and the impact on children, on sexual violence. We saw murders and so on, related to gang activity drop, and the commissioner said had to do with his policing, but the underground economy that is the drugs, illegal drugs, guns and so on, when you are a transshipment point and you've shut down your borders to the extent that ours were shut down, then that entire thing goes underground. And as you start to open up the borders, you see it surfacing. So I don't want to go through all of these areas. I'm just touching some points. For me, budgeting in a pandemic is having a closer and the opportunity to really disconnect and get a fix on what is the actual state of your place. What are your challenges in creating the society that we all desire, one that is productive, one that is built around human happiness, one that is built around, enlightened minds, a great healthy environment, good health, all of those things. This is the objective of development. You don't have to be sustainable to be sustainable development. Development by definition should be that. And how do you spend the resources that you have, the money, to promote strategically the strategies that will take you to the objective? The first set of things we can say is that you cannot have a society that has the extent of NCDs and then lock down and keep people at home to build up all the pandemic pounds that you're going to see. The explosion that is coming is going to be linked to the strategy to shut down the country, not prioritize things like exercise, like keep the beaches early on mornings, let people go for their swim, let them go for their walks, the outdoor is the safest place and so on. So you had to spend money to ensure that you come out of the pandemic healthier than you were when you went in. What are the other, I want to put on the table a few project ideas, because we always come to solutions. The strategies pursued also totally undermined the private sector. And when I say private sector, I'm not talking about big business alone. I'm talking about the individuals, the cottage industry, the small business, the medium business. The only guaranteed and protected space was the salaried worker. And the salaried worker is the community of people, especially in the government service, that we are looking to encourage them to, if we are thinking about a lean government, and we're thinking about liberating the individual capacity to earn and to grow wealthy and to be innovative and so on, and we need to support that kind of development. The salaried worker is not the highest priority. The highest priority in going towards an economy that is sustainable, independently sustainable, not dependent on all the kinds of things the government gives you and all the sharing of subsidies, which we are getting there, whether we like it or not, was to protect the people who are making a living out of their own initiatives, their own intelligence, their own creative capacity. And we decimated the creative sector. The small industry, they had no market, nobody was out there to buy anything. Up to now, they have not recovered. And therefore, what should we have done? We are wedded when it comes, this is where the elitist thing comes in, and this is where the colonial paradigm comes through, which is that we cannot, through policy, we just cannot see giving money or spending money on small people as anything but welfare, when it really should be investment. We should consider that as investment. The creative sector should not have been given $5,000 if you qualify for the whole pandemic. A person who is a creative people want to work. They want to keep doing the things. If I'm an artist, give me something to do for that $5,000. Give me a wall that I could paint. Give me let me create toys. The children who are at home, the benefit of being at home was that they were in their natural environment. But all that we are doing, despite all the new paradigm and the new normal, and we have to come out of this, very much into the future, we are hustling to force the future back into the old paradigm. That we
1 minute to wrap up, sorry.
Right. I want to put one project into this. We need an audit of all government activity in terms of its energy efficiency, in terms of its local content, this use of foreign exchange, because that is the behemoth in the society, and no change will come from us understanding and mapping government expenditure to see what is wasted and what is not. The other thing is, I want to put on the table an idea, because we have many ideas, but the whole thing about disrupting the central power and moving to a local government, we saw what happened. There was no local government. We had to give money through churches and tell them, share the money to people who need, and you only are supposed to account to God. Don't even bother to come back to us with bills, which is the most scandalous thing you would hear. But the creative sector is the project I want to mention, that what we need to do is to create a project in the society where we assemble all the talents and capabilities of all our creative people, the writers, the singers, the actors, painters, and so on, bring them to the education sector, bring the pedagogical people, and transform the entire curriculum into digital content using the skills that we already have of reimagining content and the teaching. And it must be totally applicable to the environment that we are in, because what is our working definition of an educated Trinbagonian and an educated Caribbean person? And that is where we start before we start to design an education sector that is not about warehousing of children from the age of 3 until 20, whatever, but of putting them learning in an environment that they have to master and take charge of and solve problems for. Thank you.
Thank you again, Ms. Maharaj, and thanks for raising a fundamental issue that underpins budgeting and development, which is data, and you make reference to reliable data. They would also tell you the data must also be valid. So I want to use your presentation now to start the question period. We have received questions since last night. We have over 20 questions. Some were received this morning in the chat. So I would ask the questions in batches of 4. And I would ask the panelists to, in responding, to try to be as succinct as possible while trying to be elaborate so that we could accommodate all the questions that have been asked. So I would be reading out the questions in real time. So bear with me, I may have to be doing editing simultaneously, but I'm going to start with a batch of questions that we received overnight. The first question comes from Nikita Pardesi of UNICEF. And this is the question: what are some strategies for building fiscal space to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic? What are some strategies for building fiscal space to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic? Secondly, this comes from Andrea Encinas. What is your definition of development? You can't get it more basic than that. What is your definition of development? That perhaps informs budgeting, etc. Next question comes from Lionel Remy. Would investment in a local government strategy be a more efficient approach to diversification at the level of the community or region? Would investment in a local government strategy be a more efficient approach to diversification at the level of community or region? And the fourth question that comes from Dean Allen: will the panel explore aesthetics as a right in development? Will the panel explore aesthetics as a right in development? I will now invite responses from the panel, and please try to be as brief as possible. Anyone may go first.
Hello. I would like to address the one of fiscal space. I think one of the things that we may need to do is to do a proper review of our expenditures and so on and things. You may choose to use maybe some of the local economists and so on and things to identify areas where there may be wastage and so on and things, however, and to come up with recommendations and so on to reduce wastage. I think if we examine, some of our expenditures and so on, we may find areas where we could find savings and so on. And if we, adjust them, we could be able to generate some fiscal space in that way. Thanks.
Any other response from any of the other economists on the panel? Fiscal space? Could
I just make
Professor Tierro?
Make a point? Yeah. I quite agree with Selvona that because if you think about it, when you talk about fiscal spaces, two things you're thinking about. You're asking the question, what could I do so that the money I'm spending could go wider, could go on more things, and that may well be that you have to redirect spending from some areas into the next. You have to look at where you're spending money to see if, in fact, you're spending it in the right kind of areas. But the next side of fiscal space is really revenues. We did a study a couple of years ago, not a couple of years ago, must have been 2018. And the gap, the level of uncollected revenues in Trinidad and Tobago was in excess of $10 billion. Now, you cannot be talking about fiscal space if you have that kind of revenue problem. So that's why I am puzzled when I hear people talking about the revenue authority as something that is so terrible. Without a revenue authority, we are in serious trouble. We will never get out of the situation that we're in if we don't start collecting our revenues. But you cannot run an economy where the revenues you're not collecting are as high as that. And that to me is the first thing that we have. We have to forget the nonsense, talk about the revenue authority and get it on the ground as soon as possible and run it properly, because that is how we are going to deal with the fiscal space issue.
Any more comments?
Yeah, I think all of those questions are somehow related, and but I would take it from the perspective of local government, because that is actually, I think, core to the transformation of the society, which is locating power closest to the people. But it is almost impossible, because when you have centralized power, we saw the problem with central power, it lost control. There was the capacity at the local level there was just none. And to the extent that the central authority could not do the job, you saw the weaknesses. And you see it in the information sphere, where notwithstanding daily news conferences, so many people did not get messages. They didn't understand it, they didn't tune in, they interpreted differently, because what we need to do is to ground these things close to people, all the systems. And that issue of the tax is related to local government reform, because we cannot be talking about property tax and promising people it will be spent in the local area. We have to have a legislative framework that allows local government to collect the tax. If we can eliminate the alienation in people between the tax they pay and the service they receive, then people will see what am I getting for this? The health surcharge, you cannot be putting everything into the consolidated fund, right? Because you're paying the road tax, and so on. People need to know, I am paying this and I am getting this, but I want to get more of that, so I will pay more. And so that whole alienation, what we are still running here is the governor and the rest of us. And we have to go beyond the symptoms and the problems that are surfacing and keep asking ourselves, why? Why is this so? Why is this so? Until we come to know more whys. That is what development is, I think, when you come to that point, as opposed to just dealing with symptoms and say, okay, you have a crime problem, more prisons. You have a school problem, more schools. Construction, that's it. That's the response.
Yes. Anyone else? Aesthetics as a right to development. The same person expands on that.
If I can respond, but
yes,
to the previous,
Priya, sorry.
The previous questions on the fiscal space and the definition of sustainable development, I endorse what the speakers would have said about, collecting that outstanding revenue and reform of local government. But just to add, how do we create fiscal space? We want to increase government revenue and reduce expenditure. So we want to reduce the size of government in our economy. And how do we do that? We stimulate the private sector. This is where we implement the initiatives where we can grow the private sector, not just big business, but SMEs and entrepreneurship. And that way we create employment, we create taxes, and we wean off the government. And that's how we create that fiscal space for the government to benefit. Now, in terms of a definition of sustainable development, we don't need to reinvent any definitions. We do have the 2030 agenda, which is very comprehensive, and we have signed on to the 17 SDGs, and they encompass so many aspects of development, from no poverty to climate change, to issues of water, partnerships, inequality. And that is your definition of sustainable development and your development framework going forward as a country.
If I may,
Thank you, Priya. I just want to complement the question in relation to aesthetics as a right in development. And the same person asked in the chat, how does the panel see social art design as a form of creating sustainability in our development paradigm. I would like to pull culture from the capitalist construct we always end up placing the arts, unquote. Any takes on that particular question?
Dr. Mccree, thanks.
Yes.
Looking at the way art plays a fundamental role and is actually tied again to that definition of development, where I really draw upon it from the Michael Manley's. He says, any realistic vision of change must be made on the notion of the empowerment of people. And what Dean was asking around the aesthetics as a right in development is where there are movements around the world which really thinking about the right to beauty. But what makes this, I think, different from the type of mainstream approach right now have to what we call beautification projects is the idea of co-creation and public space. Many times beautification projects, like major architectural ones or ones that have to do a tender, the designers are not from the community where they do the work, and they might engage with some consultative element, but it is not co-created. And it might be vandalized within a year or two. And then people say, look at them, the people and them can't take care of nothing that they have in their community. And you have a little bit of destitution, and then it goes on Facebook and everybody will say, look, they never deserve anything in the first place. They do like nice things. And we really need to rethink the way that we engineer the public space for whose benefit. So is it that we create art in communities? And I'm particularly interested in public art, and that would be like tracks for public transport between the main road, Eastern Main Road, and the priority bus route. And it will also include play parks where young people use for recreation, but also older persons use for exercise. And we really need to think that communities are deserving of art. And it really forces us to move beyond, I think, capitalist notions of profit and to whom this must serve for the aesthetic of the nation. And it must really be invested into what the community has. And in many ways, the community creates its own art. And that's how steel pans and yards are formed. And the state could provide assistance to that rather than try to engineer something on a larger scale for a tourism product, which did not have them in mind.
Thank you. Tayemba, any post-colonial insights into the role of culture in capitalist development or underdevelopment?
Yes, and I also want to engage the simple yet very complex question of what is a development. There's a saying that sometimes the devil is in what isn't said. And so I am not really a fan of the sustainable development goals. It has very fancy concepts of eradicating poverty, dealing with inequality, but it does not really engage the Caribbean's insertion into a neoliberal, colonial, and capitalist space in which there are just so many inequalities and ways that profits and this business sector is elevated over people and profits. So in this realm, Trinidad and Tobago, for example, will be seen as a developing society, and more dominant countries will be seen as developed. So the idea then is that Trinidad and Tobago should mimic the developed countries, and thus we have a Vision 2020 and now Vision 2030 that aims to transform Trinidad and Tobago into a developed nation. And this to me is part of our major issues around the development paradigms, that we are ascribing to very flawed and hegemonic development paradigms that did not really come from the people. They were not inclusive of a wide range of experiences and sensibilities, especially from the global South. But we are out here trying to fulfill capitalist dreams and new liberal agendas while often neglecting our own history, neglecting our Caribbean indigenous body of knowledges. And that to me has not really been in the favor of the majority of citizens.
Thank you, Tayemba. I want to recognize Dr. Indira Rampasad, whose hand was up. Indira? Are you still there, Indira?
Thank you very much, Chair.
Yeah.
I had a burning question, and I'm only asking because I was really asked to do the vote of thanks, but I have a burning question that I thought I should raise. And it is the whole question that came up in the budget on the public sector wages and salaries and the settlement of those. And when we talk about inequity and inequality, we have to recognize that many of our workers in the public sector, even and public sector bodies like UE, which are paid employer is UE, but we're paid by the governments of the region, are on 2011 and 2014 salaries, while we see some of the conglomerates like Massey, Bermudez, Sagico, we are seeing huge profits. They're making huge profits. So this exacerbates the inequities and inequalities that we're seeing. The poor man continues to be poorer and the rich man richer. And COVID has basically, I don't know, they have really capitalized on COVID because we're seeing them making even higher profits on 2020. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Indira. Let me ask another batch of questions received overnight from Brenda Bannister. Can any measures be taken by the government to curb increasing food prices? Can any measures be taken by the government to curb increasing food prices? From Professor Anton Allaha, one of our renowned sociologists from Trinidad, based in Canada. The description is quite comprehensive, but omits the issue of race and racial identity. How does this panel respond? I'm not clear what Anton means by the description. I don't have the context, but this is the statement stroke question. The description is quite comprehensive, but omits the issue of race and racial identity. How does the panel respond? Thirdly, from Makeda Diese, consultant on agroecology and pedagogical innovation. Are any of the institutions represented integrating cooperative economics as part of their organizational strategy? This is from Brazil. If so, how? Are any of the institutions represented integrating cooperative economics as part of their organizational strategy? If so, how? And I will take a question from the chat. It is time, from Nigel Gittins, it is time, way overdue, that we begin to look at other options for the delivery of health services. One such option is the conversion of all health infrastructure to public-private partnerships. One such option is the conversion of all health infrastructure to public-private partnerships. The state would lease the existing infrastructure to private entities and set stringent targets for these entities to meet. This new approach will require a robust national health insurance scheme to pay for this. This should improve standards and capacity. I invite panelists to respond to any of these suggestions.
If I may, I would briefly to the issue of cooperatives. As it relates to cooperatives, the national budget, or especially around the issues of youth and agriculture, have been creating certain accommodations where young people with a farmer's license would be able to get into agricultural development. Now, there's an idea that Trinidad and Tobago never diversifies, I mean, to the extent we may want, but there have always been a strategy to do it. Even if on your plate of food on Sunday, you have a macaroni pie, a rice, a pasta salad, and beef, goat, and chicken, you still just throw a piece of lettuce and a tomato because you know it must have some vegetables on it. Likewise, national development could look like that as it relates to agricultural development and moving away out of the petro sector. And what that really shows is certain opportunities that there could be cooperative models around the way young people bring together their human resources in it. And that is not just a political proposal, an idea. One of the submissions the credit union movement made was to stimulate entrepreneurial activity on the premise of the cooperative model. And they were willing to build capacity around that. And in fact, they affirmed what are the potential in the budget around the issue of cooperative model. So the cooperative model, I think, is just the ways we need to develop now a more legal structure to access finance and capital that don't just come through the brave, pull up your boots person in the entrepreneur. And we just see how cooperatives and social entrepreneurship, and of course NGOs, which play a role around capital investments and so on, could play a very interesting role in stimulating the economy. So when we say private sector, it becomes a more complex network of actors rather than we think as corporations.
For any further response, just some clarification on Professor Anton Allaha's comment and question. When he talks about the description is quite comprehensive, he's referring to the title of the discussion, Budgeting for Development in a Global Pandemic. Budgeting for Development in a Global Pandemic. And he says the description is quite comprehensive, but omits the issue of race and racial identity. How does the panel respond?
Well, I think the issue is, I would go to the issue of identity. And I would also take Amilcar's point about cooperatives. I will extrapolate from that to go back to some basic principles of the challenges that this country and the Caribbean have all faced at the point of independence, which is how do you restructure and redesign a colony that was built on the overt principle of divide and rule, a minority group of rulers and over a majority. The divide and rule was control containment, because you cannot really, as South Africa tried, as the Dutch in South Africa, without intense oppression, you cannot manage a majority. A minority can't, unless you create structures and systems. And in our case, the silos that that translate themselves into divisions of class, race, color, shade of color, gender, all these things, is one of our largest impediments to development. And I see governments now, political parties are just throwing up their hands in the air and preaching to their half. They think it's half, and if you can convince a few more people than half, you can get power. And so we have not attempted to restructure the society away from the silos and build bridges across the divisions, which is of course what the education system can very well do, with community development, which is broad-based, where you restructure for that. What we have kept, again, I come back to the centralized nature of power, and I want to make a point. 70% of Trinidad's economic resources are on what would be called the coastal area. And I'm not just talking about Point Lisas and Port of Spain. I'm talking about the tourism resources and so on. They're on the coastal area. I think about 80% of the population is also in what you would call areas of impact and influence on climate change. We are still building all the highways to Port of Spain. We are not imagining a future where we have to open up communities, link them to each other, and begin to drift inside of their place. And the only way you can do that, again, is you have to prioritize local government, but not local government as we know. It will not come from governments. Governments will not give up their power, but it will have to come from a more engaged public, and all the resources each of us has really has to go into empowering each other to look at the world in front of us, our home, our skills, our capabilities, and demand the policy initiatives to develop them, one of which is a local content policy. For every dollar the government spends, how much of that goes to local and how much of it goes to small and cottage industries in order to develop them in terms of contracts and so on. There's a whole infrastructure for that. So these questions of division, which I think might have inspired that, these issues that might inspire that, really comes back to what is our project for independence and for development.
Thank you, Sunati. Any more take? There's the issue of public-private partnerships, Professor Tierro, in relation to delivery of health services. The same person, I think, suggests the use of public-private partnerships for the delivery of educational services and talks about the centralized nature of educational system running its course. And it's time to hand over this sector to educational professionals and entrepreneurs. This is education, but he also talks about PPPs in the context of health service delivery.
I am not sure about I think it may sound horrible, but the private sector involvement in health is not one, I think, that would cause us to be attractive to pull them in more in the health. But this way, I think if you think about it, the objective of the private sector is to make money. And many times what you have to do in health are things which don't involve making money at all. In fact, I mean, you have to find money in all kinds of ways, but the health thing itself is not to make money. So I am not, I think what you need is not a public-private thing. You need a sort of collective approach. You see, like what I call the social security system is where everybody pays into something, which is then set up to serve everybody. That is what you need. So if you call that public-private, I would go with that. But it's more a collective thing where it is you. But to say that you're bringing in private elements to combine with the public elements, that's not exactly what we want. But if you do it as a social security, people the social security in a way combines public and private in that sense. But it is done the way it is structured. It doesn't come out under the influence of the private philosophies then, but because it is the private philosophies which are causing a lot of our problems. Yeah, the private are too individualistic, and that is where our problems are actually coming from.
Okay, thank you. One person from the USA, David Thomas, has a question statement, not too clear, relating to local government reform and the securitization of government debt for community development projects. Local government reform and the securitization of government debt for community development projects. I don't understand that language. I don't know if anyone of the panel can connect to the idea here relating to the securitization of government debt for community development projects. And David Thomas is saying, are there any lessons that have been learned from COVID-19 in relation to this issue? Another issue relating to local government that some of you have spoken to.
Certainly, Chair, and if you will allow me to go back to the previous issue of race and racial identity.
I think we are losing you there, Tayemba.
Really speaks to what the reasons. Okay, I'll come.
Okay. Any more responses from that batch of questions? I want to ask another batch.
Yeah, I want to just ask Carl, when we talk about public-private partnership, why must we assume that private is big business? Why is private not cooperatives? Why is private not small business? And if we define private as being that the whole stream, then you could activate community capital. And if you activate community capital for education, for any of the services that people provide, and give people a stake in these things, can you not delink from the way in which the economy is structured to poles of growth at the community level that actually translates into taxes to run the business of government? I mean, a different shape of government. Why should it be that we want to have public-private partnership in agriculture and we gave 1,000 acres to a big business? Why can't we not say at the community level, we want the people here, and we want you to accumulate your capital and invest it in that on small basis?
I mean, I totally agree. In fact, that's why I use the word, it's sort of collectivist approach, because that's what your cooperatives are. They are private individuals, but they kind of combine in a way which does not come out with the basic private sector philosophies. That is what I am concerned. I don't want us to involve ourselves with anything that bringing in the private sector philosophies in really what we are doing. That's all I'm saying. Okay. But
a lot of cooperatives are trying to behave like banks.
Well, you see that is
talking about credit
yeah,
union.
that's a problem.
Okay, any more? Dr. Hazel, there's a question directed particularly to you. Hotel operators in Tobago have stated that international tour operators identified vaccination as a requirement for properties and tour activities to be included in their packages to visitors. Is any assessment being done on the impact of low vaccination rates on the Tobago economy?
Well, at present, the unit which I lead, the Economic Management and Research Unit, we have a major research project on where we're looking at the impact of COVID on the Tobago economy. And as part of that study, we would pick up, the impact of vaccination, the vaccination rates and so on and things. So yes, my short answer to that is yes.
Okay, I'm reading some questions now from the chat. The perspective shared mainly or focused mainly on the ills are commendable, like Professor Tierro did. I am wondering whether the other panelists can share at least one explicit start point to address the main ills they identified. This is coming from Cheney or someone so named. How do you address the ills or begin to address the ills if you all have not already indicated such, or you can repeat what you stated?
So I am certainly a fan of the work of Walter Rodney, who says that when issues are understood historically, the solutions are self-evident. And I don't think that we in this country have a good understanding of the issues that face us. So it could be somewhat problematic trying to find solutions for problems that we don't properly understand. And sometimes the elites and even academics have an issue of pontificating about solutions when all of the voices and all of the experiences haven't really been heard. And that really brings me to the previous point I wanted to make about the question raised by Anton Alaha, which is a really important one. And I am not a fan of the Sustainable Development Goals, mainly because it does not deal with how race and class biases, as well as our wider insertion into empire neoliberalism, all of that is not really connected to the paradigm of development. So there are many unspoken parts of sustainable development that do not deal with crucial parts of our development process. And so in our schools, you have people, children, who are experiencing the same race, color, class, religious, and gendered biases that are present in the wider society are being reproduced in the education system. And a lot of this limits not only the potential of our children, but also the possibilities for our country and society to really deal internally and indigenously with ourselves. That is to see ourselves through our own lens.
Thank you, Tayemba. I don't know if any panelists want to rebut or engage that comment, but just looking at the chat again, to Professor Tierro, thanks for the profound remark that mobility being an enemy or is an enemy of GDP. What kind and level of investment and what kind of priority interventions are likely to reduce mobility? That's from Lionel Remy. Another question from Simone. How do you propose we address the pre-existing and now widening labor demand and supply mismatch? How do you propose we address the pre-existing and now widening labor demand and supply mismatch?
If I could address the thing is simple in a way, because right now, when you talk about morbidity in Trinidad and Tobago, in the region, as a matter of fact, you're talking about the non-communicable disease. And I say we have evidence from Barbados, from Jamaica, from Trinidad, where we can tell you what the impact on these diseases, what the impact is on our gross domestic product. Therefore, the concern has to be now, we have to put something in place to deal with that. We have to arrest that. We have to arrest that, and we have to reverse it. How do we arrest? It is the diabetes, it's the hypertension, it's the heart disease. These are so-called lifestyle diseases. How do we arrest these things? Well, of course, there are two things. One is we have to have a greater investment in what we call public health. Now, public health is something we have around. We know about our food inspectors and things like that. But of course, what the thing about public health is that is where we have this system which is monitoring the health of the population. You know, in a way, you have to see the health system as a system which is now focused on keeping people out of hospitals, and instead of having a health system which focuses on hospitals as something grand. The system has to we have to set up we have to set up our health system in a way where we're trying to do things to try to really educate people enough to really try to get them to look after their health in a proper way. But secondly, you have to set up in a way where you have such a screening capacity for the system, whereas so that as soon as people come down with any set of problems, we really pick it up quickly, and we have a management, and the primary care system is strong enough then to manage it in a way that people do not end up with complications and all these morbidity things that we have been hearing about. So I'm saying that we have to set up the system like that. Now, in order to get it off the ground like that, you have to give access to healthcare to everybody. Everybody must have access. People must not have to wait weeks and months for some tests, right? Or some little surgery that they need for the eye, or they mustn't have to wait weeks and months for. And how you do that? You bring the total capacity of the health system, public and private. Bring the whole capacity, make it available to everybody, so people could go for the care in the public or private, right? So that the question of the long waits for this and that would be there'll be an end to that kind. So I'm saying the social health insurance has to be seen not simply as a financing thing. It has to be seen as something that is really aimed at bringing down the level of morbidity, because it will give people a greater chance to get their checks and so on in a more efficient way. As soon as something hit them, they can go and get a check and get it seen to properly. And that is what the social health insurance is going to assure everybody. So it is in that context, and we say that it is really the single most important thing we need to put in this country. And you see this COVID time that's going on here, the situation with low-income people is going to get even worse in the immediate future, within the next few years. It is going to get worse. And therefore, you have to put something in place to really cushion them. And the thing to put to cushion them is this pool of funds, this national pool of funds, from which everybody then will be able to get the kind of care that they need. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Tierro. I want to share 3 questions with you that come particularly from our students. One is from Tishana Budusi. How far away do you think we were from achieving developed status prior to the pandemic with compounding deficit budgets? How far away do you think we were from achieving developed country status prior to the pandemic with compounding deficit budgets? Secondly, from Anelia Daniel, do you see the cultural and creative industry playing a key role in the sustainable development of Caribbean economies? Do you see the cultural and creative industry playing a key role in the sustainable development of Caribbean economies? And lastly, from Stephen Abiraj, another student of ours. Can you please discuss budgeting for treatment of the digital divide within Trinidad and Tobago and between Trinidad and Tobago and the outside world? Can you please discuss budgeting in relation to the digital divide internally and externally?
Should I take that?
Yes.
Okay, so budgeting is all about spending choices. Your choices have to be conscious. It can't be, well, we are accustomed to doing this and we'll keep doing that. What are the conscious choices we decide coming through the pandemic that we need to invest in? And to me, that goes to the issue of the digitizing. It definitely goes to health, because the question of health is about nutrition and is about physical activity. And these are things that have to be ingrained in lifestyle from childhood. And in that case, we have to look at what is the use that we make of the early childhood education sector, which is quite a significant investment in plant in terms of buildings and so on. What can we do with that to put nutritional behavior and activity behavior into children from the age of 3 if the home environment before that was not able to handle it? And how do we bring parents and have them be part of that learning and that cultural change? And I want to say that early childhood education should really be a place where parents are also coming to get their access to social help, social welfare, fill out these forms, get it if you need, but also to get exposed to nutritional development of your children on an ongoing basis and for their mental health and all these things. Parents always take their little children, their 3-year-olds to preschool, and their captive location. And we need to see early childhood centers as something more than preschool. The other thing is, it comes down to physical development. It should be unthinkable that communities do not have play spaces. And schools, every school must have play spaces. You're finding more and more schools that don't have recreation grounds and schools that have taken physical education straight off the curriculum because, why? Because the children are coming into class sweaty. Since when is that a crime? And so those things, if we ground a culture, if we can spend money with those objectives in mind of creating a culture of a lifestyle change in terms of what you eat, the knowledge about the food, why are these things, why is the fried chicken and so on with the MSG and so on not good, and be in touch with parents, we could come to that point where we need less healthcare. The other thing about the digitized thing is that if you're going to invest, and you have to prepare and open up the world to your people. You cannot just invest in hardware, in the computers. You have to invest in content. And that is where we come and answer the question about, previously spoke about activating and canalizing the energies of the creative sector in the creation of content. All our students should be taught history based on dramatic interpretations and, go and do the documentaries. The Caribbean is so rich, the environmental science, geography, history, all these things, that is original content. You may buy a package of physics, but you have to create this. And not only that, you should master it. It should be the world coming to you to buy that content from you. So I just put that there.
Okay, thank you, Sunati. Any other takers? If not, I'll go straight back to the chat. Dr. Mohan, one of the issues that is continually omitted by everyone is the platform upon which all our production of goods and services and costs are attendant. The cost of land is extremely high in Trinidad and Tobago and presents a real prohibition to persons wanting to start up or those wanting to thrive. Another question before you respond, Priya, let me give this one. What have been the implications for interest rates and inflation of deficit financing over the past several years? This is from Kenrick Lord. What have been the implications for interest rates and inflation of deficit financing over the past several years? Any impacts on longer-term economic growth and real income distribution? Yes, Priya.
Thank you, Chair. That last one I'll start with first. The impacts of interest rate. I think the point is that deficit financing is not necessarily bad, and we were in a situation where we needed to go into deficit financing. Even pre-COVID-19 from 2018, we had fallen oil and gas prices. And so we did need to borrow and increase our debt. Now, the impact on the other macroeconomic variables, it's complicated relationships that you can't just speak to in 2 minutes. But the point is, borrowing is not bad, but that borrowing must be targeted towards productive economic activity that's going to lead to the government becoming more efficient and collecting more taxes later on. I think I'll go back to the first one now, but I'll link it to a comment I wanted to make in response to Amilcar and the youth in agriculture, and also the question of from Mr. Cheney about one specific solution, because I think the panel gave a lot of solutions, but it's so many that we got lost in them. We do see a return of youth into agriculture in Trinidad, and that is very encouraging. And this re-emergence of youth going into agriculture is important because COVID-19 showed the impact of the loss of value chains and the food insecurity and reducing our food import bill, foreign exchange, etc. Now, these youths are not just going into agriculture in a traditional way, but they are adopting the modern type technology. And this ties into the question of land and land being expensive. The use of these types of digital technology allows you to reduce your inputs as someone in the agricultural sector to maximize your output. And these technologies are not expensive, and they are readily available on simple smartphone devices, etc., where you can look at how you reduce inputs into creating greater outputs in agriculture. Just out of agriculture with the issue of land, I think SMEs need to jump on the digitization of their businesses. Through that digitization, you no longer necessarily need a space to operate from, but you operate in a virtual space and you are able to produce that product and deliver it to market and make an income.
Thank you, Priya. I have been given the wrap-up warning, so I would just ask 3 quick questions to end this discussion aspect of the presentations.
One small point on what Priya said. I want to support her point on deficit finance, and this is a point I think the country has to understand. People talk as if deficit financing is something bad, and when a government goes this big deficit, terrible thing. That is nonsense. The fact is, if you go back to Professor Arthur Lewis used to say, when you're in a jam in the economy, it does not matter where you get your funding from. What matters is what you do with it. So whether you're borrowing, whether you're printing, it does not matter. It's what you do with it that matters. So the concern hasn't got to be with deficit financing. The concern has to be with, are we using the financing we have available to us in the most efficient and the most productive way? That is the question. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Tierro. Last questions. Why is there so little talk of micro enterprise and regularizing businesses operating in the informal sector? Secondly, in relation to Dr. Hazel, it would seem that the unemployment figure is low because the state is the largest employer, and this will continue. Can you highlight what development strategy on a continuous basis that the THA intends to embark upon to allow the private sector, I assume, to develop? Lastly, from Carol Roberts, what are some recommendations for making the education system relevant to ordinary people? What are some recommendations for making the education system relevant to ordinary people? So we are in wrap-up mode. So if you're responding, please be brief, and you can also give your own final thoughts.
So I'll take you one for me. So there are a number of strategies in place, to develop the private sector in Tobago and to diversify the economy and so on. And under the Division of Community Development and so on, there is the Enterprise Assistance Grant and Enterprise Assistance Loan Program, where they provide financial assistance for persons and so on to establish as well as expand their businesses and so on. And not only financial assistance, there's also technical assistance as well. Also, they have a number, through the core eco-industrial estate as well. They provide factory shells as well as land space as well for persons to establish businesses, establish and expand businesses on the island. And, so those are two of the main things I could think about, just to be brief. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other responses, or you may wrap up? 2 seconds.
Yes, certainly. I just wanted to speak on the question that asks, what can we do to make the education system more relevant for ordinary people? I think that is a very important yet very complex question, given how the education system is interlocked with a lot of other experiences. It is connected to our insertion into the global world system. It's also connected to a very adversarial two-party political system. And it is also related to a society that was never created for the majority of people, but it was created for elite interests. And we have yet to rescue our institutions and our society from that elite stranglehold on our vision of development. So if we need to remap our sense of development away from trying to achieve some very flawed and bogus developed nation status to reshift it to somewhere else that is more rooted in a Caribbean vision of development, that is rooted in developing strategies and institutions that will really benefit the majority of people. And a central part of that has to be listening to a wide cross-section of people who otherwise would be seen as not even worthy to contribute, not even worthy to speak or have an input in their development. So it really speaks to listening to ordinary people and finding ways to include them within different conversations, while often reforming and transforming the entire sense of local governance and leadership.
Any other short comments? If not, I would like to thank you personally for making the time this morning to be a part of this ongoing discussion concerning our development, past, present, and future. And I would now hand over to my colleague, Dr. Indira Ramprasad, to give the vote of thanks. So thanks again to you and our listeners near and far.
Thank you so much, Chair. My task is a simple but critically important one. It's just to express appreciation and thanks to all who participated in this forum this morning to make it the success that it has been. But first of all, Chair, I would like to thank you for the excellent job you've done. It's highly professional, kept to the point, and kept the speakers on time. And that is very important because we were able to hear everyone and we were able to get in a lot of questions from the audience, which is always very, very, very important because the whole purpose of these forums is also to engage our public. I want to particularly thank our 6 panelists, individually and collectively, Professor Carl Tierro, Dr. Salandi, Dr. Hazel, Dr. Priya Mohan, Ms. Suniti Maraj, and Mr. Amka Sanatan. I thoroughly enjoyed the forum because of its eclectic stance. You dealt with issues ranging from health, education, food security, inequities, and ultimately the development problematic of the Caribbean, and more specifically of Trinidad and Tobago, which is a big part of the agenda of SALISES itself, the research and teaching agenda of SALISES. So I want to sincerely thank you panelists, without whom this forum would not have been possible. Our marketing and communication staff has been disseminating information robustly and vigorously, if not aggressively, to bring you to the campus. And, you know, one of the advantages of COVID is that we get more people at these forums because people can just log on at the touch of a button, those who have the luxury of a good connectivity and internet service and computer devices. So MNC, Ms. Joanne Green, Ms. Chanel Glasgow, and the rest of the team at MNC, let me thank you all very, very much for your contribution and your hard work in making this forum possible. And to the members of the SALISES family, Ms. Kathy Ann Modest, I have probably received about 10 emails from you in the last 2 days, and I appreciate what you're doing, and we want to make sure that it was perfect. I think we perfected it in every way, in terms of sound, in terms of video, in terms of Zoom, everything that goes with the technology to make this possible. Ms. Modest was also, I'm sure, highly involved in organizing the forum. Ms. Francine Allen, my old friend, always there and for a very, very long time, long-standing member of SALISES and always involved in these public forums. Mr. Sheldon Warner, Mr. Efren Thompson, Mr. Leslie Brewster, and the rest of the SALISES family. Let me thank you heartily for your contribution as well. To my colleagues at SITS, our colleagues at SITS, Mr. Darren Dore, who's always been present to assist the UE team and UE members with IT issues. And as we saw, we didn't have any major hiccups. I don't think we had any hiccups at all. So to Mr. Dore and your team at SITS, let me also express a sincere appreciation on behalf of SALISES. And the virtual audience, at one point there were more than 80 persons, some 80-something persons here. And like I said, this is one of the upside of COVID because we have now become quite technologically savvy, some of us, and we understand from the forum that not everyone is fortunate to enjoy some of these luxuries, but it's certainly been bringing more people to the campus forums, something which we are very happy about, happy to see that we are engaging the public at a wider level. So virtual audience, each and every one of you for taking the time off to come to this post-budget forum today. Post-budget forums are always important to the public because some aspect of it directly touch the lives of the population. So I want to thank you all very much for being here. The media houses, media establishments that have come here, whether it's social media, whether it's mainstream media, we will never forget you because you play an important role in disseminating information to the public, whether it's in the 7 o'clock news or in the 4 o'clock news or in the newspaper, whether it's in Facebook or Instagram, Twitter. We appreciate your presence here, and I also want to thank you all for being with us for such a long time. You've always been present at the SALISES Forum. So let me thank media personnel, media establishments for their presence here. And last but by not least, I want to thank our director, our acting director, Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard. Without him, so he would be at the top of the pyramid, directing, organizing, disseminating information, and making sure that everything's pulled together as comprehensively as it was. So Dr. St. Bernard, you're not forgotten. We want to thank you sincerely for pulling all of this together. Thank you very much, everyone. I promise to be brief. I know it's probably past our time. It's almost 12:30. So with that, I hope that you stay safe, you stay healthy, and you stay at home because Delta is in town. Okay, so goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much. I'll pass to the chair in case he wants to make any closing remarks. Dr. Mccree.
I would defer to Dr. St. Bernard, our acting director, for any final closing remarks. Dr. St. Bernard.
Well, I have to say a profound thanks to everyone who has participated in today's forum at all levels of its delivery. It went way beyond my expectations. I know it would have been a top class event. And when I say it went way beyond my expectations, it's really excelled and surpassed that superlative top-class event that I envisioned it would have been. And it could only be so because of the contributions of all who participated in it, as declared in the vote of thanks. And this has been the first of a series of virtual SALISES forums that we will be hosting for the next year in the first instance. So I am hoping that all of you, we do have your contacts. We will keep in touch with you, and we will keep informing you about all of the forums that we expect to have. I would think by next month, we may want to do one on the education system. As we have heard, the children of forms 4, 5, and 6 will be attending secondary school, whether or not they are vaccinated, and we would want to really have a few experts in the various issues come and speak and address that concern. It's our effort to always ensure that we have a strong SALISES and UWI contribution to our forums, and that remains as is. So all of you, stay tuned. We are coming at you again, and quite apart from this treat that you witnessed today, we have several other forums in terms of special topics that we may want to present to the public and to the academic community in terms of seminars and symposia that we do have in mind. So everyone, thank you very much for spending the time with us. Have a wonderful day, rest of the day. Enjoy your weekend, and most of all, as indicated by my colleague, Dr. Rampersad, continue to be safe and observe all the protocols. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure indeed.
All right, everybody. Bye-bye, everybody. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Safe, everybody.